For decades, Sweden was seen as the embodiment of sexual freedom, so much so that President Dwight Eisenhower once expressed outrage at the nation's supposed inclination toward sin, nudity, and drunkenness. In 1971, following Denmark's lead, Sweden became the second country in the world to legalize all forms of pornography. Yet when it came to prostitution, Sweden took a far stricter stance. In 1999, it pioneered the so-called Nordic model, which criminalized the purchase of sexual services but not their sale, aiming to reduce demand and protect vulnerable women. This model has since gained traction internationally. Over the past decade, France, Ireland, Israel have adopted it, and Scotland is considering its implementation. Now, Sweden is attempting to extend its real-world Nordic model into the digital realm. On July 1st, a new Swedish law will come into effect, criminalising payments for participation in live pornographic broadcasts on platforms such as OnlyFans, best known for adult content. However, performers engaged in online sexual acts will not be penalised. Violators of the new law face up to 1 year of imprisonment. The law arrives amid a growing shift of sex workers toward digital platforms. Many who previously offered physical sexual services have moved from street-based client searches to online advertising. In recent years, virtual sex work has gained increasing popularity. Purchasing sexual services and content has become easier and more socially acceptable than ever before. 14% of young American women say they would be willing to sell content on the OnlyFans platform. 16% say they would consider becoming sugar babies, offering companionship and often sex to older men. The boundaries of what constitutes sex work are becoming increasingly blurred. In Sweden, 8% of girls aged 15 to 19 reported having sent sexual content or met someone for sex in exchange for money, often via specialised apps. In an era where sex and relationships are increasingly taking on an overtly transactional character, many members of the current generation do not consider their actions to be sex work, unlike, for example, work in brothels, which is typically viewed as more exploitative. These shifts raise two important questions. Does the Swedish model work in real life, and should it be applied to virtual sex work? Supporters of the Nordic model in relation to traditional prostitution argue that purchasing sexual services is inherently exploitative and that restrictions are necessary not only to protect the vulnerable, but also to suppress demand. In denying sex workers the right to bodily autonomy, they have claimed that many are mentally unstable and come from dysfunctional backgrounds and poor heredity. Although attitudes have softened over time, elements of stigma and denial of personal agency persist within the Nordic model, which is based on the assumption that many women enter sex work not by choice, but due to childhood trauma or poverty, and that they should be rehabilitated. Similar patterns are emerging among those entering online sex work. The Swedish government maintains that since virtual sex work also carries risks, it should be regulated in the same way as the sale of physical sexual services. Moreover, digital prostitution is seen as a potential gateway to real-life sex work. But does this argument hold up? Current policy may actually distract authorities from addressing the truly harmful aspects of the sex industry. This is partly because it is often easier for police to arrest clients than to pursue pimps and traffickers. While the number of cases involving the purchase of sex in Sweden has risen, there have been no convictions for human trafficking. Rather than protecting vulnerable individuals, existing legislation may harm them. The stigmatization of sex work discourages both sex workers and their clients from seeking treatment for sexually transmitted infections. Migrants engaged in sex work are especially at risk. Although selling sexual services is not a criminal offence in Sweden, it can still be grounds for deportation. In 2022, Belgium became the first European country to fully decriminalise sex work. In December of last year, it granted sex workers formal labour rights, including paid sick leave, maternity benefits, and pensions. Brothels were also required to obtain licences and comply with occupational safety and hygiene standards. Unlike the Nordic model, this approach is supported by many scholars who argue that full decriminalisation helps reduce stigma, prevents police harassment, and allows for a clearer distinction between those who engage in sex work voluntarily and those who are coerced. As one sex worker put it, "Prostitution gives me more autonomy and control than working as a waitress." We all have to sell ourselves to survive. Nevertheless, prostitution has long remained a profession with minimal rights and protections. This became especially evident during the first COVID-19 lockdown, when many sex workers had to rely on food parcels. When the government mandated that brothels use masks, disposable sheets, and carbon dioxide monitors, it marked the first step toward official recognition of the industry. Nevertheless, change is slow. In Belgium, only a handful of licenses have been issued. Sex workers say they have not registered officially due to bureaucratic hurdles and tax burdens. While the legalisation of physical sex work offers numerous benefits, from reducing violence to improving access to healthcare, which positively affects both workers and clients, it also requires thoughtful regulation to safeguard their rights. Extending protections to online sex work presents a more complex challenge. Still, any regulatory efforts must be grounded in empirical evidence, which, though incomplete, suggests that virtual sex work may be safer and offer greater autonomy than its physical counterpart. Like other professions, both forms carry risks. Regulation should aim to minimize these risks while allowing innovation to flourish.